Well, I'd like to welcome everybody for our last speaker of the first night of the HMGS Roundtable, sponsored by No Dice, No Glory. Today we have with us Liz Davidson from BeyondSolitaire.net, who's a multimedia influencer, I like to call her, who runs an amazing podcast, which you should listen, especially season 1, episode 10. There's a couple of funny-sounding guys on that one. But welcome, Liz.
Thanks so much for having me. It's awesome to be here.
Yes. So look, first question is, I'd like to hear a little bit more about BeyondSolitaire.net. Why'd you start it?
So I started it because I think that I have the same affliction as all solo gamers. So I'm primarily a solitaire gamer, and we like to play by ourselves, but then we like to go online and talk about it to each other. It's just the way that we seem to be as a community. You know, we have a huge guild, huge Facebook group. It's just, you know, there's something really delightful about having a really intense gaming experience and then going online and talking about it to other people. So I originally started Beyond Solitaire as just a blog to recount my experiences of solo gaming. I started in January of 2016, and I didn't have as much focus for about another year, but, you know, I posted on it pretty regularly. I was, you know, posting online, and then I was like, you know what, I could tighten up my game reviews and I could do better with this. So I redid my game review format, discovered I really liked reviewing games. And then, you know, partway through that first year, Sam Healy had put out a call for contributors to Throat Punch Lunch. And I thought, you know what? I've seen his tweets. I owe it to myself to just give it a shot. So I started, you know, making small videos for the Dice Tower. I realized I like making videos. So BeyondSolitaire.net was not just a blog anymore. I started a YouTube channel. And because I didn't have anything else to do this whole quarantine, just like everybody else, then I started a podcast this year. So, you know, I'm almost 3 years into my YouTube channel. My blog is just over 4, and now my podcast is like 2 months old. So
crazy question, because I do 2 of the 3. Do you realize, or do you feel that sometimes you have a different audience for all 3 of those things?
Yeah, I think so. What's really interesting is that sometimes I feel like nobody's really reading my site, but then there'll be somebody who just really appreciates written reviews, and I like using it as a hub for everything else. I would say my biggest audience is probably on YouTube, because video is where people want to be. And I think we're very visual. We like to see games played. We like to hear people talk us through them. So I think that YouTube is probably going to stay the dominant thing for gaming. And then, you know, my podcast is small, it's new, but what's really interesting about that one is that the people who do listen to my podcast really listen to it. And I get lots of comments about, oh, this part of that interview, or, you know, people who are really interested in a specific guest that I had. And it makes me feel really good to be making something that I really enjoy, because I'm having conversations that I normally wouldn't get to have. And it really pleases me that I can share those with other people, and they really also were into it. So it's a smaller audience, but it's just so satisfying to make something that I'm really proud of and then have other people respond to it. So I guess intensely, I get feedback on that makes me want to keep going, even though it's small but mighty right now.
So I think I cracked the code on that. I'm just throwing this out there. Miniatures players tend to listen to podcasts because they listen to them when they paint. Folks that want to learn how to play a game like the videos. Board gamers are big on the videos, but I think nobody reads anymore, so I'm just going to go with that. Yeah, so what was the first game as you were growing up that really kind of hooked you into, this is pretty cool?
You know, I played mostly just very traditional games when I was a kid. I remember my family used to play Trivial Pursuit. Like, we'd split it up. The women in the family would play against the men. The women always won, naturally.
Yeah, I was about to say, of course, yeah.
I mean, you know, we played hearts a lot. Like, I remember learning to play cards. So my dad taught me to play hearts. You know, you learn war and stuff as a kid, but that's not as interesting. You know, I remember really being into my first like trick-taking game. And I remember playing that more. And this is such a sad memory, but also, you know, I'm from the South. It's what we do. So my great uncle died, and we all went to South Carolina for his funeral. And I just remember being surrounded by fried chicken that everybody who ever knew him had brought over. And we were having all this time with our family. And, we were staying with, all these older relatives and seeing all these distant relations. But at night, we would just eat that fried chicken and play cards. I remember my parents taught me how to play poker, and we gambled with candy because everybody had the same favorites and the same not favorites. So it was really easy to assign values to all the candy.
What was your favorite?
Oh, I like anything with chocolate in it.
All right. Tootsie Rolls were the big, the big commodity when I was growing up.
Yeah, but then in high school, I had a teacher who taught us to play Axis and Allies. He had a copy of Ivanhoe, GMT Ivanhoe. And I actually now have a copy of that from my classroom to play with my students, because I used to really like to finish my work early enough and have friends finish early enough to play. And so I got my first exposures to like hobby games through Kirby Whitehead, who I actually have interviewed for my podcast, because he's really evolved in terms of what he plays with his students. So in my day, it was Axis and Allies. Now he has his AP Euro students learning how to play Here I Stand over the summer and like playing it when they come in at the beginning of the school year.
What's the reaction when you come in and say, we're going to play a game tomorrow, and then you actually bring in a game? Are they into it, or you kind of have to coerce them a little?
Well, I think in Kirby's case, he preps them. He actually has them do summer prep. They come in ready, and then they're into it by that time. If you want to hear the fullness of his process, I think it's episode 7 of my podcast, somewhere in there. For me, I normally play games with students in a different way. I'm a Latin teacher, so when we play games, they're just totally goofball, off the wall, language-oriented games. So it's sad that I won't be able to play any of these this year, but they're very simplistic in a class where everybody's learning a language. So my favorite, though, it's called the Highlighter game, but that's such a stupid name. So I call it Marker Knife Fight.
Wait. Okay, you gotta tell us what that is.
I am. It's actually super boring, but if you call it Marker Knife Fight, it stops being boring. So you just put a bunch of Latin words in a word cloud between two kids, and they pair off, and they each have a highlighter or marker in their hands. And so you say a word in English, and they race to be the first to cross that word out in Latin on the page. But the game quickly becomes, the reason you have to make sure you use markers or highlighters, no pens, is that the game very quickly becomes almost violent, and they are like stabbing at the paper very hard, and they yell and they fight over who actually got something first, and it's great. I mean,
I would use real knives with them. So
absolutely not.
So you do a lot of game reviews. I've caught a lot of them. And okay, this is a recycled question, so you knew it was coming. What
That's
game since you've been doing reviews really blew you away that you just didn't expect it to?
Ooh, that I didn't expect it to?
Or just surprised
you? Normally I have a pretty good sense of whether I'm going to like a game, but sometimes I'm surprised by how much. So I'm actually working on a review right now. So for people who do watch my stuff, you know that one of my absolute favorite games is Hoplomachus from Chip Theory. I like gladiators. I like nice poker chips. It just works out really nicely. But I had been putting off playing Too Many Bones for a long time. There's just something about it. Like I just wasn't ready. Sometimes you have to be emotionally in a place where you're ready to play a game in order to get the fullest experience of it. And I've been playing it now. And what was I waiting for? That game is amazing. Now I'm like, which Chip Theory game is my favorite? Because Too Many Bones is really good. Like I knew it was going to be good. Intellectually, I was aware that it was a good game. But then I played it and I was wowed by, wow, this is really good. Even though I completely knew that it was going to be.
All right.
So for me, it's more like that. I don't expect to maybe always be quite as enthusiastic about something as I am. And then it happens and I'm really happy about it.
So let's talk about what we're kind of going through here now, other than, this Zoom channel. So we've been on COVID lockdown. I looked at the calendar the other day. I'm like, oh my God, it's only been like 4.5 months. It feels like it's been forever. You look at the amount of cons that have been canceled. You look at, and every con is a way that a game developer gets their game to market, to gather people that find interest in their games. How do you think the gaming community has fared during this lockdown? Do you think it's been a period of things get really slow, or?
I don't feel that it's been slow. Kickstarter seems to be hopping. I have felt actually more connected to other game media people than ever before. I've made more friends that are new friends during this period than I have in a while. I've talked to a lot more people. I think that the gaming is one of those things that you do either with your family or because I'm a solo gamer. I think a lot of people have dipped their toes into solo gaming. It's got a lot hotter. Oh, if there's David saying the exact same thing. Yeah, solo gaming has really experienced a new surge in interest. I would say the gaming's actually risen to the occasion because what else are you supposed to do when you can't leave your house? And I have not personally taken this leap, and maybe I should, but I think a lot more people are now playing Vassal Tabletop Simulator. They're learning to adapt to the fact that we can't all just go to game night. So people are either doing that by playing their game solo, playing with their family, or going online and playing with other people. And in some ways, it seems to me like gaming's alive and well. Even the online conventions have been getting some activity. You know, I know that Dice Tower Summer Spectacular was a good time. I'm making some stuff for Gen Con for next weekend. And, you know, it seems to me that we've adapted pretty well. I don't run a publishing company, so I don't know about profits. But from what I see, people are funding things, people are still getting new games, they're excited about what they're playing. You know, we're a hearty community.
Yes, we are. And David Thompson, lots of people have discovered solo gaming, which is why so we talked, I believe, in our last podcast about Pavlov's house. And I said, you're going to hate me, but I've not broken the box on that one yet.
Did you get your life together?
No, it's because it's been a rough 2 weeks. But I promise you, Liz, I will play it, and I will write a whole article on it, which no one will read.
I'll read it. I'll pity read it for you.
I need pity. So as we've been locked in, what are some of the solo games that, for those of us that really kind of miss the sound of dice rolling across the table, what are some of the ones that I should have in my collection besides Pavlov's house that's going to get me through the next 8-9 months?
All right. So if you want solo war games, there's so many good options for that, actually. I feel like many war gamers are already a little bit willing to be solo gamers because a lot of them learn games by playing all the roles against themselves already. It's really not a big step over, you know. So David Thompson, you're in here. I'll embarrass you, David. You know, makes excellent games. So I've started my early plays of Castle Itter. That game is very good. I'm excited about that one as well. I have a copy of For What Remains kind of staring at me angrily, so I got to get through my shelf too. Wars of Marcus Aurelius, which actually somebody mentioned I introduced them to in the chat,
yes,
is absolutely fabulous. I adore Wars of Marcus Aurelius, and I don't know exactly when it's coming out, but its sequel, it's more difficult, challenging, and brutal sequel in the same system, Stilicho, is on the way. So that I'm really excited about as well. Robert Dulesky knows me in that he, you know, makes really great late Roman history games, which I think is undercovered. So I'm really excited about that. I'm in the middle of trying to master Charlemagne, Master of Europe right now. So I've played Agricola, Master of Britain. These are both games that are designed by Tom Russell from Hollandspiele. And those games are very interesting. They have this cup mechanism where the political leanings of your enemies are adjusted by randomly moving them from cups that are increasingly friendly on one end and hostile on the other. And you're just constantly trying to put out fires and develop enough of an engine to get enough victory points to win. And especially the first plays when you're still trying to figure out the puzzle, they're brutal. I think Charlemagne is a better iteration of the Agricola system. And I'm really excited to get enough more plays in to feel like I can give a full review of that, but I am enjoying it. I love Thunderbolt Apache Leader. I know we talked about it on my podcast about how...
No, we didn't.
We talked about Doug's complaints about them not feeling like actual flying an airplane. But I don't care about that because I actually refer even to the helicopters as airplanes consistently throughout the game because I don't know anything about desert air support, but I do know I like Thunderbolt Apache Leader. That game is awesome, and everybody should play that.
I have a bunch of his games, B-17 Leader. Matter of fact, his Kickstarter just ended, I believe, just tonight because I got a, hey, you owe me money from those guys. So are there any good multiplayer or two-player games that really work for solo play better than others?
Ooh, so two-player is a little bit harder. I have not actually played Blitzkrieg. I know it does have a solo mode, but I am under the impression that it's better two-player. I personally, and this is just a personal bias, so y'all are free to disregard, I believe that it's easier to enjoy. I find that multiplayer games that are made solo, I enjoy more than two-player. There's something about that two-player head-to-head that
Right.
I really want that second player for. So a game that I love, it's the only two-player game I've ever bothered to review for the Dice Tower because normally I won't do it, is also David Thompson, Undaunted Normandy. That game's fabulous. A lot of people will play it solo. People do enjoy it solo. But in order to solo it, you have to be willing to basically make the best moves against yourself on either side. And so it's not like you can cheat. Like you see the card information at the right time to have no hidden information, but also you not see ahead. But I really want that challenge from another person. That said, I've been really, if you're bot tolerant, then I think that something like a coin game is actually super fun. Where are we all going? You have the time to pull out a ridiculous long war game and just have a really good time. So I've actually been, I reviewed Pendragon during this period, of time at home. I really enjoyed that. I'm working on Falling Sky. I'm actually thinking about doing a tutorial series of coin games because I feel like there needs to be like a really comprehensive one. So when I get my school year together, starting these next couple of weeks, that might be something that I come back to and do as like a major project for my own channel.
Yeah.
Because once you get used to the bots, they're fun.
Yeah, the games, especially. So with a lot of games, I really like watching the videos of how to play because I think most of us can learn how to play a game wrong a lot easier than how to play it right. So I think those videos are just amazing. What is a game subject matter / mechanic or designer? Well, let's not do designer because David Thompson's name's been mentioned quite a bit. And I just realized he's on my friends list. He says he lives in Dayton. I go TDY there a lot. We may have to play. But what is a subject, period, or a game mechanic that you're just a sucker for? I have to play.
Oh, if it's Rome, I'm in. I'm a Latin teacher by trade. I love ancient history. If it's got a good Roman world vibe, then I'm in. One thing I would like to see more of, however, is, we like to focus on I think this is true of modern warfare stuff too. We have our favorites. But, when you look at ancient gaming, people like Hannibal, people like Alexander the Great, people like Julius Caesar. But I'd be really interested in, again, one of the things that's a big appeal for me from Wars of Marcus Aurelius is I adore that it is late Rome, that it makes references to bizarre political and cultural events of the time. And, that really delights me. I would like to see more late Rome. I would like to see more Roman world. Like, I'm very happy that Morgan Guillaume-Reti is currently playtesting Hubris, which is a Hellenistic period game. I think that's underdone. And I'm very excited to see how that turns out. And I would like to actually see more games that are set in like North Africa.
Like Carthage.
Yeah, but also, I feel like Nubia, Ethiopia, there's all these kind of regions of the ancient world that we don't give enough attention to. And ancient Middle East is also really fun. More Persians, more Parthians.
Very fascinating.
There's so much range. We could do better.
So we have our first question from Tim. When you play games solo, how often do you adjust the rules to reflect your personal preferences for gaming? Oh, Tim. So maybe he called you out. You're a cheater?
No. So actually, what's interesting about that is that I actually think that you should adjust them to make them more fun for you and that's okay. I typically don't because I'm a game reviewer. So I try to play things as intended because I feel like I can't review a game that I adjusted for my own purposes. It's like, like you read the review of a recipe and it's like, this is great. I added this, this, and this and took this out and changed that. Like, I try not to do that because I review. But there are some games that I absolutely play wrong and I just don't care. So like Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective, I'm not going to race Sherlock. That's not fun. I want to read all the flavor text and travel around at my own speed and let the mystery unfurl in the way that I want. And so I don't even bother to try to score myself or check speed or anything. I just have a good time solving the mystery. It's a nice leisurely experience with like some cookies and like a cup of tea. And I just don't even bother myself about trying to get the fastest solution. So sometimes if, a game is putting too much pressure on me to do something a certain way, but I just want to stop and enjoy the scenery, I absolutely will. War games, I think it's important, and historical games, I think it's important to play, for me, according to the rules, because I think what interests me the most about historical games is I'm a historian by training. So I like to look at them not only as games, but what is this game saying about this time period? What does the model that this game has created imply about the period in history? Because, you know, when you're doing history, there's two stories that it tells, right? You're learning the historical story, but you're also learning about yourself as you do it and your own time and the way that we reflect on earlier times from our own cultural position. So I like to look at historical games specifically as kind of artifacts of study as well as just games. So those I'm less likely to tinker with because it's important to me to take them as they are.
That's fascinating. And that is such a great point. So besides people like you and I, do you think a lot of gamers use games to self-learn?
You know what? I think that we do that more than we realize. So I play war games, but I would actually not say that I'm a war gamer. I would definitely say that I'm a historical gamer because I like games that have interesting settings and that I learn from. And I think that that's generally true. There are a lot of people who are willing to learn something like Lisboa. You know, it's a Euro, but it's very heavy. But that Portuguese earthquake theme, I think really draws people in and makes the game easier to learn in some ways because it's so historically grounded, even for a Euro. I think that one of the reasons that PAX Premier 2nd Edition has been so successful is I think that people really not only love the gameplay, which is fabulous, but I think that they were pleasantly surprised by how interested they were in the time period and the politicking that was going on.
Yeah, I think there's so many things that we could learn from games. You know, I know a lot of people that are really into the game aspect. This is more prevalent in miniatures where they're amazing players, but I'm like, oh, you really like that tank? Guy's like, I don't even know what it is. I just know it plays well in the game. So, so Tim, hopefully that answers your question. Let me see. We got another one here from Ethan. Senator intrigue and backstabbing. Lots of frenemy making at two brute moments. Send out your supporters into the streets of Rome. Any games like that?
Okay, so if you want a very backstabby game that is set in Rome, it's not really a senatorial game. Also, it's very filthy. Don't play with children. I do not take it to school. Is actually, you know, Spartacus, a game of, you know, Spartacus Blood and Sand themed one? Oh, what is the full title? It's called Spartacus. And you were all Lanistae who run gladiator schools, and there's a fighting component, but there's mostly like an acquiring gladiators, blood and treachery. Yes, David Thompson's got it. It is a horrible game in terms of how mean it is and like how horrible you are as a person when you play. It's delicious if you want to have that kind of experience. A game I have not played yet, but I have it. It's on my shelf of shame, shelf of opportunity, is I've got to play Republic of Rome because I think that sounds like exactly what Ethan is asking for. It's a semi-cooperative game where you're trying to come out as the preeminent senator while also trying to keep the Roman Empire from collapsing. I mean,
that sounds great. That's a fun game. That sounds
it's an empire in that you have territories, but it's still a republic in that senators are fighting over power still at this time. So it's supposed to be really fun. I'm really need to get around to that.
So I'm going to ask a question because I am probably your worst fan by asking this question. I say that a lot. So other than watching the movie Caligula a lot when I was in my youth, it was a good movie. Don't read into it. I tend not to play a lot of Roman period games. A lot of it is because I love learning the history. So if you look at what I'm buying on Amazon with books, it's probably going to match what I'm buying in games at that time.
Okay.
What would be a game you would recommend for me to dip my toe into? Because that last one that you just mentioned about keeping the Rome together, that sounded interesting. But what would you recommend for somebody like me?
To play?
No, to set on fire. No, I guess.
Well, no, I mean, like, so well, you also mentioned books. So I was like, you want a game or book? No, I got both.
A game.
So you like coin games already, right?
A what?
You like coin games already, right?
Love coin games.
Play Falling Sky. It's a Julius Caesar game. So I think that Falling Sky has some historical question marks because it's so heavily based on Caesar's own writing. So you've got these factions that are created from what their enemy wrote about them. So when you think about it, you know, in a hardcore history way. It's a really good game. It really captures, you know, at least Caesar's rendition of the Gallic Wars. But, you know, you also have to remember that you're really using something that is from the point of view of the winner. But it's a delightful game because a lot of the event cards are really rooted in things that were happening in Rome at the time. There's a lot of ugly politicking as well as just fighting people in Gaul. So you get that really nice balance of actual warfare happening at the time with events that Caesar reported and with things that we know his enemies were doing to try to stop him in Rome. So if you want the Caesar experience, I think Falling Sky is a good start. If you want a really quick solo game, I really do recommend Wars of Marcus Aurelius. It is fun. There's some really hilarious like gladiator references in the rule book. And so the event cards don't always explain everything that's going on, but if you go and look it up, it's hilarious. So one of the cards just says Alexander of Abonotakis, and there's a piece written about him in the ancient world by Lucian of Samosata, who's a satire writer, called Alexander the Quack Prophet. And it's just about how this guy was such a fraud. He had a talking snake that was definitely fake, but people believed this like talking snake dispensed oracles.
I saw a talking snake yesterday. I don't know what you're talking about.
Right?
Yeah.
And then there's a card about Faustina, who at one point it was reported that Marcus Aurelius had died in Germany. And so his wife back home freaks out, finds a new lover to try to like defend her position as Empress of Rome, and inadvertently sets off a civil war when it turns out that Marcus Aurelius is not dead.
I'm going to buy both. I hate you and Maurice. You make me spend my money because I trust you guys.
You should.
I should. So we have some questions people are coming up with. So everybody seems to like your recommendations, and I think when I see people like, yep, you got to get that game, I'm probably going to pick up both. Matter of fact, I was just about to hit buy on my Amazon before I came back. Okay, so we have a question from Evan. When playing games solo, do you ever write down moves in advance and play them one turn behind? Basically, how do you prevent yourself from being inside your own head when playing different actors? This is not a problem for me because I have split personalities.
Yeah, for me, it's not a problem just because I won't do it. This is one of the things I'm actually terrible about in solo gaming. So I'm spoiled. The best thing about solo gaming today is that you have so many dedicated solo modes. You can have an AI mode. A lot of people make very good bots and they make very good artificial opponents now. So you don't really have to play against yourself. And so now, in the spirit of being spoiled, I don't. So that's my cardinal sin, I guess, as a solo wargamer, especially because I think it's much more common among wargamers to play all sides. But that's something that I don't do.
David Thompson said he's leaving. He said he enjoyed all 3 sessions. He'll be back tomorrow. He doesn't realize I am showing up at his house in Dayton at some time because everybody's been mentioning him today. Seems like a great guy. So,
he is a great guy. Yeah.
So do you find with some of the solo games, I've heard people say there's not a lot of replayability in it. And I find that odd because I would figure they would have the most replayability. Have you ever come across a problem with that?
With replayability, typically no. I mean, I think a solo game that doesn't have enough replayability isn't going to be that different from the game itself not having enough replayability. If there's just not enough scenarios, if there's just not enough, variety in the cards, that's going to be something that plagues the entire game. Typically not just the solo mode.
Yeah, I just I've always heard people say that, never really kind of understood that. So I'll throw it out because we're about halfway. I've been keeping these things on time. So about halfway. If anybody has any questions, please shoot them, or you can come and you can unmute yourself, I believe, and come talk to us. If not, I'll just start asking more and more crazy questions. So I'm going to repeat a question we asked Mo before. Sure. If I was to go to your house, I think we all know what your favorite games are because you advocate for them, and my collection's already getting bigger from talking to you. What is the surprise game we would find in Liz's house?
Oh, maybe not that surprising if you watch everything that I do, but my favorite underrated game is actually it's actually a DVG game, but it's not the kind of Dan Verson game most people think of. I adore Cards of Cthulhu. That game is so chill for a game that's about encroaching old ones and the end of the world as we know it. It's just a really pleasant play. You're just using your cards in your hand to, well, I mean, you're basically, you're rolling, so there, you pull these cards and you're putting them on these different boards that represent old ones trying to awaken. And you roll dice and you cast spells to try to manage all of the cards. You can get assistance. You can, the coins that represent your experience are really nice. It's just a very pleasant game. I need to get that back out. It's been a long time since I played that one and I miss it. So thanks for that.
Yeah, hey, that's what we're here for. So what is the best game I'm not playing right now that has come out in the last year?
Ew. I'm horrible about knowing what year it is because I just play things when I play them.
Right.
Best in the last year.
No, it just could be really of all time because there's so many great games out there. No matter how much people like you and I, via our various means of mind control, try to get excitement for these games, they just don't catch on. What is one that I should be playing?
Ew. Other than the ones I've already mentioned, that's a tough question just because I should be playing so many more games. Good Lord.
Yeah, you don't
have you played Conflict of Heroes?
Yeah, of course.
Have you played the solo?
Yes.
Okay, so you're playing that. Like, I mean, you already played it. Okay.
I'm already playing it. Have you ever met Uwe?
I've not. No.
You need to interview him for your podcast. He is a force of nature. He is a very interesting guy, and I will get you in touch with him too. But Conflict of Heroes is an amazing game. And
yeah, well, I mean, I figured you probably played it, but I don't know how much of a solo gamer you are. But that solo mode is excellent. It's really uniquely good among solo modes. I was very impressed with that card system this year. And it was one of those games that, everybody mentions it. It's kind of fallen off the People's Choice solo lists. And I was thinking, I'll revive this. Let me have a look. And I could see absolutely why people love it. And I was sad to watch it kind of start dropping from the list.
And do you have, I have it the 3rd edition too. Actually, I bought it from him directly at Connections last year.
So here's something you should try. So you play a lot of war games. You should try the polar opposite, which is called Dawn of Peacemakers. It's designed by Sami Laxo. He's the guy who did Dale of Merchants. Uh-huh. And it is a cooperative campaign game where you are trying to stop two sides of a war from going to war. So the entire thing is about interrupting battle plans and manipulating units on the map to decrease hostilities until they both stop fighting and go home.
That's still a war game, my friend.
But it's very good. I like it a lot. The other thing that's interesting is, yes, it is very much still a war game. There's still conflict going on, and I think one of the most interesting things about it is a game. And I don't know if Sami intended this, but in order to achieve peace, people do still have to die essentially on the map. And you're the one, because you're the one doing all the string pulling, who can unintentionally cause that. And I think that is very interesting if you think too much about it.
I try not to think too much about anything, as you can tell.
Yes,
talking to me now twice.
Also, Tim is right. Warfighter is fabulous. If you've not been playing Warfighter, get on it.
I have. Well, I have the first edition, and I know they redid it. I have to upgrade my game. So, we talk about, well, that is a war game, and I think we covered it a little bit with Maurice too. But I don't find any problems with that term. Do you have to end up after you say I play war games? Have to sit there and explain it to somebody exactly what that is?
Well, I think it depends. I actually have a very loose sense of what definitions should be just generally. So for background, I have my graduate school, I got my PhD in a religious studies department. It's in ancient Christianity technically, but one of our very first seminars, we had to try to define religion and quickly discovered that is not actually very doable. By many definitions, football is a religion, and so is Oprah. In fact, the department head in my graduate department at the time that I graduated wrote a book about sort of the religious aspects of being a big fan of Oprah. And so I really believe the definitions are there only for as much as they're useful. So if I say I play war games, people understand that what that usually means is little counters on a map fighting. But I think any game about war, depending, do you want to call this War of Mine a war game because it's about war? Or does a war game mean that you have to actually fight a war?
Well, I'll throw out a question. Is chess a war game?
Maybe a very abstract one.
I think it's
It's
go ahead.
it's head-to-head combat. It's maybe the purest war game in a lot of ways.
Yeah, it's I just think it's one of those terms, especially now, really turns people off. But if you look at what the realm of wargaming is, it's huge because I consider the coin games war games.
I do
Uh,
too. Yeah.
any game that has to deal with that strategic political thinking, to me, is a war game. And then I'll even go further. I think any game that deals in competition could be called a war game.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, games are just little wars that we fight safely according to rules amongst each other, right? But I also think that when I have to clarify about war games, I think for me, the main thing I'm always clarifying is that I'm not saying that I play war games to kind of, I think a lot of people are, and there's nothing wrong with this, I guess, but people are like proud of the fact I'm a war gamer sometimes, because what the undertone of that is, right, is I'm a heavyweight gamer. I play really hard things. I'm not scared of really huge binder size rule books. You know, I'm like the highest level of elite board gamer because I war game. And I like complex games. I think there's nothing wrong with that at all. But I also think that I try to tell people that I'm a war gamer in a way that does not imply that I'm doing something scary, because I want more people to play war games.
I've talked to you twice. I don't think you're a fascist. I think that you're a perfectly fine person. No, you know what I realize, like, so when people ask me what I do for a living, well, I war game for a living, and I tell them that, and right away they're like, they do think I'm a fascist. And then I said, well, what do you do for a hobby? Well, I war game. So I get it on both. I think war gamers sometimes, and this is more of a question than anything else. I don't think we're our own best PR department when it comes to growing our hobby. I think a lot of times we don't like telling people we're war gamers for whatever reason. And the only way I think to grow it is, if somebody were to come to me today and say, I don't know if I want to get into a war game. I don't know if I want to get into this hobby. I would show them your videos, Maurice's videos, the Lead Pursuit podcast. The enthusiasm and excitement you guys have for these games makes me want to game more, regardless of the title. How do we get last meeting we had, how do we get younger people? But how do we grow this hobby?
I think there's a lot of ways to approach that. One, I think, is just enthusiasm. I mean, I convince kids that Latin is fun for a living. So
God bless.
Anything can be done.
Yeah.
But I think that a lot of it is about showing your enthusiasm. I think it's great to be really excited about something. And I think that war games give you a lot to be excited about, especially in that more historical realm. There's so many people who are interested in history. And I think that the more war games we have about different periods, the easier it's going to be to kind of snap somebody in off of that thing that really interested them. I never thought that I was going to be interested in something like Pavlov's House, because I'm not really a World War II person. Then I played it and I was suddenly really interested because the gameplay was really good. The history was really good. And like together, those things really made something click for me. And actually after that point, I started playing a lot more modern games. Thunderbolt Apache Leader, I liked it for the leveling up and the assigning of points. It's really just it's kind of like you could really have a fantasy version of something like Thunderbolt Apache Leader with leveling up and distributing resources and repairing your equipment. But I actually really ended up loving the game and how it felt to play it, how it felt to get really attached to the pilots, even though they are all like these identical looking dad looking guys. It was really I think one of them is in fact named Daddy-O.
Which has nothing to do with him being a father figure. I will assure you of that. But we need more folks in our hobby that can give me 15 minutes with anybody and I could turn you into a war gamer. I think there's just so much out there. So let's talk about everything being out there. We're seeing a lot of games hitting the market. A lot of people would say we're in the golden age of gaming. I'm ready to believe that. Is there going to be a point where we're throwing too much out on the market that there may not be a fan base for?
I think that right now that's not happening, but that we are throwing too much out on the market that's just okay. I think it's the thing that's interesting about being in a golden age of gaming is that as a reviewer, I find I play a lot of sevens, if that makes sense. I
Yeah.
play a lot of games that are pretty good. They're good, but I'm looking for that thing that just makes my heart sing, and those get harder to find because they get lost in the noise. And I feel like the job is to really sift out the very, very best. I mean, it'll also naturally happen. I mean, think about music of a couple decades ago. We only think of the best songs now because all the direct just kind of sank to the bottom of memory and it's gone. The other thing I think, though, is that we're also seeing innovation from so many games coming out, even in things like popular franchises. You mentioned Gloomhaven. So Gloomhaven's a great game that I didn't play enough because it was so annoying to set up. But this new Jaws the Lion edition, which I have a review coming out for, is unique because it has a scenario book instead of a bunch of map tiles. And it also has a very lovely tutorial sequence. And what I'm wondering is, if we think that this is so great, is this an innovation that we can apply to other games? Can we have better tutorials for heavier games? Because I think that the thing about heavy games is that they're hard to learn all at once, maybe, but they're really just games. If you've played games before, there's really not a big leap between a Euro game and a war game, or between, playing a bunch of really heavy stat boost fantasy stuff and then going to play a war game. I mean, Dungeons and Dragons is itself a descendant of war games.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that, the more we can kind of collapse those categories, but also the more we can make the mechanisms of war games more intuitive seeming to people, I think it'll be I think if we put work into that process, I think getting people into wargaming is going to be really possible. I also think that just covering more, making it easier to on-ramp, that's what I consider my job to be.
Yeah, and the on-ramp is huge. So let's talk about technology and gaming. I was asked not too long ago from a established game producer, what can we do? What do you think is the next big thing? And I pointed to this game I'm pointing to it, but nobody could see it, called U-Boot. That is a solo cooperative game where you're in command of a U-boat, but you need an app on an iPad or an iPhone to kind of play, because it kind of acts as the AI. It throws that randomness in there. And I said, games that are using other forms of media where, look, everybody makes their lists on tablets. Thing is, when you play the game, that's no good anymore. You have to have the cards, you have to have this. Do you see any technology that we could leverage in the next few years that could bring even more innovation to gaming?
I'm the worst person to ask that question because I'm still having a hard time learning how to play Vassal, or just getting up the motivation to do anything on Tabletop Simulator. I actually play a lot of video games. Actually, the one thing that video games have that a lot of board games don't is, again, go back to that tutorial. But for me, I like analog games because they're analog. I'm not totally against apps, but I don't find them exciting. I would be more interested in things like clarity, ease of setup, streamlining components, streamlining rules. For me, those are the things it's those basic things that you have to get right. Actually, this actually may come from the fact that I'm a teacher again. Every time an interesting new ed tech thing comes out, people get really excited and they're like, oh, this is going to revolutionize my classroom. And they bring it into the classroom. But if the base thing that you're doing isn't really, really good, it doesn't matter how good the tech is. The game itself has to be good, and the presentation has to be good. And then tech might be impressive, but it's not going to fix anything that was wrong at the time that you brought the tech in.
So I even from talking to you before, I'm really starting to see your ideology behind games. So for you, what is more important for you? Historical accuracy and flavor, or very deep, clear to understand rules that may not be as deep with the history?
Ooh, I think that you can essentially get the best of both worlds. I think that because it's a game, it has to be good as a game. Mm-hmm. Especially because games cannot exactly model history and still be interesting, because no one wants to play a historical game in order to exactly live out what already happened. The fun of a historical game, right, is the mystery of, what if I'd done this differently? What if this had happened another way? But instead of reading somebody's alt history book, which I don't like to do as much, it's what different decisions can we all make now together? I think that historical games have to pick an aspect of the history that they want to bring to life and stick with that. You can't recreate the whole thing in a playable and fun game, at least not to my knowledge. So I think that when it comes to historical games, you pick the conflict or the argument that you want to make, and you make a very good game around that, instead of getting overly bogged down and getting every detail in. That's something I actually think PAX Premier 2nd Edition does very well. That game is fantastic because you can see Cole Worley's identity as a historian, as an academic in his game, but the gameplay is so streamlined, and it really gets across the points of destabilization, jockeying for power. Every action in the game makes sense thematically, but you're not going to play the game and fully understand the Durrani Empire's fall and like the aftermath, but you're going to get a sense of what it felt like to struggle in that time period. So then when you go learn about that time period, that emotion comes back and you can map those things together.
Wow. Yeah. That very well stated. I'm still trying to get my head around some of that too, but yeah, it's like 100% right. So one of the things I'm starting to see a lot as games are advertised, especially on Kickstarter and Board Game Geek, that a lot of it is playable in less than 2 hours. I don't really find that as something that attracts me for a game. I'm going to be over with it that quick. I might as well do something else for that hour. What is your opinion of that?
Ooh, restate that one more time.
A lot of times they try to market games that are quick play, that you'd be done with it in an hour, and sometimes that is not a selling point with me.
Yeah, I think that sometimes that's good because sometimes they only have an hour, but quick is not necessarily good. I mean, some games are super quick and they're great, like Orchard from Sideroom's games. It's like the tiniest little game. It's like a 9-card game, and you overlap trees on top of each other and try to score points for the fruit you grow in your orchard. It's 10 minutes or less. It's so speedy, but it's built to be that, and that is good. I also think that having longer gaming experiences is important if you want something really rich, but even the coin games are adjustable. You pick a different scenario, you can have a different length game. But just because something is a certain length doesn't mean that it's good. Just like a long game isn't necessarily good because it's long, and that doesn't necessarily make you any smarter or make the game any weightier. It could just be long, in which case we have a problem.
My games are long because usually I'm just rereading the rules over and over again, which I wonder if you do that as well. But every gamer does that.
Yeah. All my rules mistakes are like on display for people to see too. Every video I ever put out, it's like, oh, by the way, at 12 minutes and 45 seconds, you did this wrong. And I'm like, yeah, probably. And then how many people play perfectly? I think most people do not play a game flawlessly when they play. They just don't catch it because there's no one on YouTube to tell them.
I know people that, especially miniatures, that are masters players. They're like among the 20 best in North America, and I play them, and they don't know the rules. What is up with that? But I've also sometimes sat down at a game, and I'm like, why is none of my ideas working? I realize I'm playing a similar game, but a different version of it, like the Command and Colors games. I'm like, yeah, Napoleonic tactics do not work in the American Revolution. Well, that I know, but I learned something from that. So
yeah. I mean, I think games are wonderful in that particular way too, especially historical ones. Learning from your mistakes and getting to do that in a safe environment is really valuable. I actually think that that's why we like to talk about professional wargaming as well, right? What better environment to try something that fails than one that is a model of what you'll do as opposed to a real high pressure situation. Being able to think through options without that pressure, I think is very good. And I actually think that that's also true. When we talk about history, I think one of the reasons that we like to talk about history is because it's talking about ourselves without talking about ourselves. So I think somebody in the comments was saying like, oh, well, what about problematic themes? Maybe earlier ones are less fraught. I actually think that is true. I think it's easier to talk about the harsh reality of the Middle Ages or of Rome and about what they were doing and how they responded, because it feels distant enough from us that we can talk about it without getting overly emotional or attached to certain outcomes. But at the same time, because every time you do history, you're also talking about yourself, that examination teaches you something about how you would like to do something or about what you think works. And so I think that even down to your mistakes, right? Every time you play a game, it teaches you something about yourself or about how you play or about what works and what doesn't. And so the better the game and the more interesting the model that the game presents, the more valuable that gets.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, it just comes down to playing a lot of topics that some people aren't comfortable with. So last year was the first time I recall seeing a game that was pulled from pre-order because of the topic. I'm not going to get into it, but it was about the colonization of Africa. But then I remember talking to Uwe Eckert, and he does the game about the Underground Railroad.
Mm-hmm.
And, people are complaining. Look, I don't need to go to a statue to learn the history. But if I really want to know the history, I'll either read a book or play a game. And I think, especially for a game, I think it's more tactile. I think it brings the lesson home more. And I was kind of upset that that game was canceled last year, but I understand why. I wish it didn't.
I actually think that talking about tactileness of games, that actually brings up an important point, right? Because in some sense, I mean, I don't think that video games make kids violent or anything, and it's nothing that serious, right? But in many ways, we are what we choose to embody. So the things that we choose to play as and the kinds of games that we choose to try to win and the processes that we choose to be a part of, I think we do have to think about how useful that really is, whether it's useful or whether it's really, really not or potentially harmful. I talked to Tom Russell about this recently. His interview with me is coming up in my podcast on Monday, actually. But he had a really good point about how he designed This Guilty Land, because he didn't feel that it was productive necessarily for somebody to just play as the South and try to be that. And so he had tried to work it into his game to where it was productive to play either side, emotionally, intellectually. I mean, I think for me, Scramble for Africa was not something that looked great to me as a game, because it didn't look like something that it was worthwhile to do as an intellectual project, in addition to being a fraught topic.
Yeah, so you mentioned the game, but it's when they pulled it, I realized from playing, especially video games, the Nations game, one of them was about the colonization of North America, and they did the Napoleonic one, they did Rome, which I'm sure you have in your collection. But from there, I kind of learned a little bit about why some of that was necessary. However, yes, when they took out Scramble for Africa, I didn't really get to see a lot of. I just saw the topic, and I saw a lot of people very upset about it. I didn't see what the big what the big issue was, because it depends how it's done.
But I think that the box art alone was telling you how it's done, and
Yeah.
that wasn't exactly where he wanted to go. I personally do think that games should be allowed to be about difficult subjects. I don't think that there should be subjects that are necessarily off limits, but I do think that the way that they're done matters. I talk about Labyrinth sometimes in this context. I think it's really important to confront our current reality, even if it really hurts, in a game like Labyrinth. It is not always a fun game to play because it can be so raw. Like, it's one of the few games that I play where there are events in that there are event cards in that game that happen in my own lifetime and that I have really intense attachments to. Like, I remember when Benazir Bhutto was assassinated. And so, I was on a ski trip with my grandparents when we watched announce the war in Iraq on the TV, and so for me, that game is interesting because it's a way of looking at events from my own life that are difficult, upsetting. It's kind of horrible that they've had to release another expansion going up to the present,
Right.
I mean, this is something we all thought would end, but I think having it as an artifact of ourselves in game form is something that's really valuable. It's something that has to be done right.
You bring up the game that I avoided buying for a very long time for personal reasons. But when people would say, well, you've been to that part of the world, could you explain why they would do something like that? I can't. I'd lose the words. But I finally got Labyrinth. And I explained to people that this is one way to kind of get inside the head of an adversary that you will not find anywhere else. It's like, I call it the Balkan ghosts of the war on terror. You know, the one book or the one keystone that really gives you the insight into how somebody that's not us think. And you bring up the points about, you know, this is part of us, this is part of our personality. But I think we also learn a lot about other people's personalities and what is important to them.
Yeah, and the thing that's interesting about that is, you know, I've actually spent quite a bit of time traveling and working in the Middle East. I studied Coptic monks, so I ended up doing a lot of archaeology in Egypt during my grad school years. I have traveled in Jordan. I've traveled in Syria. Actually, I was in Syria in 2010, right before the Arab Spring. I've been to Turkey. I was actually working in Egypt at the time that the very first presidential debate was televised, and I watched it from my hotel in Cairo that day because it was a day off. And, you know, that is one thing that I don't think that the Game Express is that honestly, go travel through the Middle East, and the people that you meet are just people. They're just normal people, right. Families. They're fun. They want to have friends. They play backgammon in cafes at 4 a.m, which I think is a perfectly fantastic cultural innovation. Yeah. And, you know, I think that in some ways they don't understand either. Kind of the way that we look at elements of our own culture now, especially as we become more polarized, you know, and I think that we find other elements of our own society unfathomable and don't understand each other. So yeah. A game can never capture it all, but it can maybe give you a glint of something.
Right. Yeah. I've always had a hard time explaining the why. And I said to somebody, well, you have that game. Tell me what you think afterwards. So, well, hey, we are drawing near an hour. And I first of all, I'm going to thank you for carrying me through this, because I really tried hard not to ask any repeat questions. But I got a million more things I would love to ask you, but we're going to have you on again. Is there anybody that had a question that they want to ask Liz? I'm going to take that as a no. Once again, our audience has been resilient. For some of them, they're on hour 3. And I appreciate it. But Liz, thank you so very much for doing this. I know that you have a busy weekend coming up, and I want to thank you for helping us out with this first ever HMGS. For those of you who do not know, Liz and I plan to write a book on, should we tell them? Should we tell them what the themes are?
Did we agree to this? Sure.
No,
Let's just do it. Let's just do it. We'll pretend. We'll go for it.
Yeah. We're going to write a book on the oddest things that we've come across in the gaming community. Because let's be honest, there's a lot of, I am one of the weirdest people that you'll meet in this hobby. So yes, there's a lot of people like me, but I want to thank you very much. This will be on YouTube either tomorrow morning or tonight, depends, because we have a bad thunderstorm coming in. So probably tomorrow. Where can we find you?
I'm everywhere as Beyond Solitaire. So my website is beyondsolitaire.net. I'm on YouTube as Beyond Solitaire. You can find me on Instagram, Twitter, Board Game Geek, Facebook as Beyond Solitaire. And my podcast is very creatively also called Beyond Solitaire. So I just have consistency across the board. And I love hearing from people, so reach out.
Yes, you have, let me tell you, you have amazing fans because I see what they write. But please check out the podcast. It is good. It is great. The videos are really good as well. Great. Sorry. I need to, use my better. I know how it is. But once again, thank you guys very much. And hey, we'll be back tomorrow at 6 o'clock with Slithering and Matrix games. We're going to talk about some video games tomorrow night. So Liz, thank you so much. And I will tell you when this is up on YouTube.
Thank you. I really enjoyed this. Thanks everybody for listening and asking questions and coming to this.